Let us talk a little bit about you, Howard. So like I said, so you're not a writer, but you have written this book, Treasure, Shipwrecks, and the Dawn of Red Sea Diving. So tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to want to write this book, and then we'll get into what the book itself is about.
Sure. Okay. So I was born in New York City, but at a very early age, my parents had the wisdom to move to California. And I grew up in Los Angeles, where I went through school and university and graduated in anthropology and archaeology from University of California. And I had a scholarship to study at Tel Aviv University in the late 60s. Exactly, if I want to be specific, I saw Robert Kennedy the day before he was assassinated because he
Mm.
was on our campus in 1968 when he was running for president. So that's just kind of a time frame. It was crazy times in America and a lot of disillusionment. Anyway, I had this opportunity to study 1968, 69 in Tel Aviv University, archaeology mostly and anthropology. I fell in love with the country and also a beautiful young American student who was studying on the same program. So we've been together for almost 60 years now. That's my wife, Sharon or Sharon. And I had a chance occurrence which triggered something that became my career and my passion in life. And we could go into that in depth. But that was when I was 21 years old. And that led me into a profession, and that profession had many adventures and exploits, which were kind of unique. And that is the basis of my book. So, I mean, basically, I'm an American kid born and raised in California, educated in California, moved to Israel at the age of 21, and started out on a career in scuba diving, actually. And fate or whatever would bring me into certain circumstances, which we could talk about. And we have four children, 10 grandchildren, all of them living here. Each one is smarter and more beautiful than the next one, but obviously I'm very objective. And that that's the story right now. Yeah.
Okay, well that's great. So I want to ask. So wanted to ask. So what was the motivation or the inspiration for you to write down the book? I mean, I like to ask with guests for screenwriting, it's the elevator pitch. Here's what my story, here's my book about. For writers or for authors, I tend to ask, what's the cocktail party pitch? What is your book about in like 1 to 2 sentences? And so you're at a cocktail party, and someone says, Howard, I hear you wrote a book. Tell me, what's it
Yeah.
about?
Bloody Mary. No,
That's the first question.
no.
Second question is, what's your book
Yeah.
about?
So the book is about my career, at least part of it, because I've been in the scuba diving business for over 50 years. And during that time I had some quite unique adventures. And I found myself as I approached my mid 60s, 70s, sorry, that a lot of people didn't know what I had done in my career, and I wanted some kind of a legacy, I guess. Also, I have all these grandchildren who wonder what this old man is all about, and I said I better put it down on writing, and with pictures. And so the motivation was basically to capture a certain period in my life, which I thought and others was a unique period. So if the California in the 60s was unique in one way, the Sinai in the 70s was unique in another. And it put me in a position, in a place, in a beautiful place, but a desolate, very isolated and harsh, but beautiful terrain, the Sinai Desert, the tip of it, that had been captured by Israel in 1967 in the Six-Day War from Egypt. And when there was no apparent peace treaty on the horizon, Israel set up a few settlements along the Sinai shore, to concentrate basically on tourism, which I had the opportunity to be on the first. Um, anyway, so I guess the cocktail pitches, I got this story. It starts with a gold treasure, which
Hmm.
is kind of a cool cocktail story. And that enabled me to basically fulfill a dream that I had as a young Californian to do something with what I love, which is the sea or the ocean. And diving, scuba diving was just uh, taking off at that time. If some of you might remember Sea Hunt and Jacques Cousteau's series and things like that, it captured our imagination. And growing up on the beach in California, I'd say that that was a dream for me to do. And I ended up being in the right place at the right time to start a diving school 6 months after I learned how to dive myself.
Hmm.
So this word chutzpah can come into play here, right? Yeah. But at the time, there was nothing here. I mean, it was the second diving school in the whole country. And it started on the Mediterranean shore in Israel, just north of Tel Aviv. And then I had the opportunity, because they wanted to set up something in the Sinai, to go down into the Sinai in the very early 70s. They just made a road. There was no road there to go down. I was just following the bulldozers as they were going down, opening up new areas. And I opened a branch in one Oasis resort place. Well, resort is it wasn't really a resort. It was pretty meager and primitive. And then I ended up going to a place called Sharm el Sheikh, which is the southern tip of the Sinai, which has arguably some of the best scuba diving in the world. Once again, it was chance. I mean, we didn't have books to read or research. It was just you followed your instinct. And I got into this place just at the right time. I opened up the first diving center there. Now there's arguably maybe a couple of hundred
Mm.
and hundreds of hotels and hundreds of boats, and even international peace conferences are going on there all the time. But at that time, it was a little outpost, maybe 300 people living there, one hotel,
Mm.
one diving center. And it was a magnet for people to come and explore this faraway, exotic place. And it was just, I mean, they dumped a train car on the beach, literally a wooden train car from World War One. They dumped on the beach, right, and I lived in a little trailer with my wife. It was about the size of a Volkswagen van. And we had a little boat that was like a pregnant surfboard with an outboard motor and an Army surplus Jeep that we needed. You could look at on the cover of the book. You see it there with a camel, because always the camel was always ready to pull us out of
Camel
the
equestrian.
sand when we got stuck. And the subtitle of the book is A Pioneer's Journey. So basically, at a young age, 23, I was able to be a pioneer in an area that had nothing like that. It was the Sinai, you have to understand, up until that point was, from time immemorial, was a battleground.
Mm.
It was where armies went back and forth from Egypt to Mesopotamia and up to even 1967 and even 1973 when I was there, it was a battleground. I mean, terrible wars. That's what people associated with. But we were a generation that had the opportunity to turn a battleground into a playground.
Mm.
And I think that was a unique possibility. And it attracted some pretty incredible people who wanted to participate in that experience, if not living it and working there, but at least visiting it and seeing it. So I had, and part of the book talks about some very famous people who came down, and one cute chapter is with the maestro Leonard Bernstein,
Mm.
who was a frequent guest, diving and visiting with us there. But others, diplomats and politicians, world leaders, uh, celebrities. Barbara Walters was diving with me as well. Um, so on one hand, we were converting this region into a user-friendly touristic attraction. On the other hand, we were very committed, and this is the second theme, of protecting it. Having been raised in California and deeply entrenched in ecology and ecological issues and nature preservation, I was part of a team that was involved in guaranteeing that this area would not be exploited as so many other places like that have been. So I was involved in the enactment of very strict uh, laws against fishing, spearfishing, or coral collecting, shell collecting, which was and setting up nature reserves in the area. And then when it turned over to Egypt in 1982 with the peace treaty, to be involved in maybe convincing or presenting that philosophy to the Egyptian government, which is coming back and returning. So the book is about scuba diving, adventurous sharks, treasures, shipwrecks, but diplomacy, war, because I went through the Yom Kippur War there, the peace process. I was in Egypt presenting this and meeting with the Egyptian government and ultimately getting permission to stay on after 1982. But this, I am, my career in scuba diving is a half a century. This book covers the first 15 years from 1968 until 1982. And I'm preparing a sequel because it was just I was drained after the first
Hmm.
period, so I'm getting my strength back and then preparing for a sequel, which is the continuation.
Okay, that's great. So I have interviewed authors of memoirs, and one element that really stands out for a lot of memoirs, and in yours in particular, is the attention to detail. I mean, names and places and events, etc. How were you able to fill in so many blanks about your experiences? Do you just have exquisite records? Were you just relying on like a lot of pictures, or like, oh, that's that's so and so, and they came and this time, and oh, this is the dive we did in May of '74, that kind of thing.
Thank you for that, and it's an excellent question, really. And I'll just go back to the beginning because being a persona in this field, I would entertain people on my boats and on these trips. And part of the thing was giving a slideshow and orientation, and then a few memories or interesting stories and entertaining people because it's a touristic experience. And frequently the guests, who came from all over the world, would see these slideshows and hear my stories and say, you got to write a book. And, and frankly, I was a guy wearing Speedo bathing suit and just trying to survive in this environment. I said, I don't have time to write a book. I'm busy working. But what I did, say, you know what, maybe someday I will have time. So I took a big notebook. And every time something interesting would happen, I'd just write a sentence and I'd say, shark, man eats shark or whatever, man bites shark. National Geographic magazine was very instrumental in my career. And we did 9 stories for National Geographic on the region. And, and my mentor was a Dr. Eugenie Clark called the Shark Lady, who was a best-selling author who wrote the book of the month, Lady and the Sharks and Lady and the Spear. And she basically taught me a lot of things about the sea, but also about how to record and how to remember things. And this was all put away, seriously put away, but it kept on, I would like to add to it and add to it. And then, and I'm an obsessive photographer. I
Hmm.
mean, seriously, beyond, I need help. I need therapy. So I always had a camera with me, and like I said, worked with National Geographic, and we took pictures, and I had thousands and thousands of color slides, as you probably know, having thousands of color slides creates a problem today because you have to digitalize them
Mm.
and be able to use them. Which, so I had this collection and boxes of slides, quite a few articles that were written up in magazines, newspapers, books, chapters and books, some of which I even contributed to. So I'm a half a writer even before. Um, so I had all this stuff stored up in boxes and cardboard. And then you might have heard it in 2020, there's a thing called COVID, right?
It
Which
rings a
turned
bell.
all, yeah, which rings a bell, which turned our life upside down.
Mm.
And I have a company today, which I have with my son, that is actually manufacturing underwater photographic equipment. And it's directly related to tourism and leisure time and things that disappeared in 2020, right? I mean, for
Hmm.
2 or 3 years, the bottom fell out of that whole world, including the scuba diving as others. So my dear wife, who never throws anything away, I said to her, I said, Sharon, maybe we could pull out these boxes and things and I'll start writing up that long awaited memoir. And I did. I started writing in 2020. I had more than enough photographic thing, also images. And my friend David Dubélé, who's the National Geographic photographer, was kind enough to let me use some of his mind-boggling images. I approach people who I know in the industry to maybe famous people to write forward. And then I started writing, putting body into these one-liners, so to speak. And I have a pretty good memory, thank God, at least up until now. So I was able to run some drafts on, about 30 chapters for a memoir. Now, that was only half of my active, when I say active career, it means in the services. It means taking people actually diving. I'm more in manufacturing distribution,
Mm.
but for the first part of my life, 30 years, it was mostly services. So I said, I'll stop, at that point. That's where I'll cut it off right now. And in that period, I'll divide it into two. So the period when we were in the Sinai until 1982, from 1970, that was the period of this book. The sequel will be the continuation, another 15 years.
Hmm.
We're under contract with the Egyptians or permission. I had a floating hotel, which worked in Egypt and all the way to the Seychelles Islands. So I was able to split, and the sequel will be coming out when I have enough strength to finish it. Um, but I wasn't, like you said, I'm not a writer, okay? I mean, not on the level that people would really want to buy a book and read. So I was talking to an old friend of mine who had written his memoir, a lovely man who's 100 years old today. He's a relative, and he had an extraordinary life. And I said, Jerry, I want to do this memoir, but I'm just not ready. I have the stories, but I'm just not ready. He says, you got to talk to Steve. Okay. Everybody needs somebody, right? So Steve Moss is a ex-journalist who, for the Boston Globe, whose career now is to help people write memoirs. And basically, he picks your brain. You could send him a draft, and he says, well, what about this? And this is, and that's not important, but you got to
Mm.
develop that. And I had never met him, but we worked on Zoom back and forth for a year, exchanging chapters back and forth with corrections and the whole word thing, and had enough meat, I think, to do a query letter, right? Now, mind you, I'm sitting on thousands of slides too, which complement these stories. It's not like I'm making up some. I mean, if you have the book, so you could thumb through it, and there's 200 original images. So the combination of the two, I wrote up 4 or 5 chapters, did what they query letter, which I had no idea what it was until my cousin, who was helping me do the proofreading, said you got to do a query letter. So I did a query letter based on her suggestion. And then, so then I learned that publishers never talk to authors. You got to go through an agent, a literary agent who pitches your book, and they carry the query. That's what my understanding of it. But just as I was preparing to do the first look for the literary agent, I saw online in the internet an ad for a publishing company in England that specializes in things like mine, the stories like mine. It's called Dived Up Publication. Dived Up Publication. So I wrote cold turkey. I wrote to him. I said, this guy named Alex Gibson. I said, Alex, I got this book. He apparently he's a diver, and he had known about my career because,
Hmm.
like among other things, modestly, I'm in the International Scuba Diving Hall of Fame. So he had heard about my adventures, and he said, "Well, send me some samples of what you've done." So I sent him the query letter that I had just finished, and like a day later, I get an email from him. He says, "I'm in. I'll do your book." So I said, "This is easy." What's the big deal about publishing? I'm getting your book published. And under his guidance and mentorship and basically final editing and putting everything together, the images, the graphics, the layout, the printing, he took it over
Mhm.
and created the book as it is as that you're holding in your hand right now. And he deserves a lot of credit.
That would be
Yeah,
this book.
there you go. Yeah, and Steve Moss, my muse or mentor, deserve also credit for helping me make it more palatable, more enjoyable, and richer and meatier. And asking me the right questions and also telling me, that's not really interesting, leave it out. So I give a lot of credit. Also, I made my friends crazy. Now I'm in the diving industry, and many of my friends are authors who have written their own memoirs, and I'm relentless. I just started writing, sending them. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? I was probably making them all crazy, and but I was getting good input and good feedback. So I just say with a lot of help from my friends, I was able to put the book together, and it launched. I launched it at the Explorers Club in New York City in November 2024. They have an event called Sea Stories, and it's a prestigious event, and they were kind enough to host me as the book launch, and I was blown away by the whole experience. And after my talk, they had a table, with books. You know how it is, right?
Hmm.
And there was a line of people waiting, and I wasn't ready for that. It's been well received, well reviewed. There were stories in Forward magazine or newspaper, or whatever, and a lot of publications all over the world. And so it's done well, and I didn't expect it to be so well done.
No,
Anyway, that's the English book.
okay. That's
And it's
fantastic.
now in its second printing. There you go. And this is the softback. What you were holding is the hardback,
Hmm.
and this is the softback, which has just come out. Yeah.
Yes, I
So
have the
it's
hardback.
it's very much the same book.
Okay, I actually wanted to ask you, so a lot of the events throughout the book, and you referred to this a little bit earlier, that there's a strong seafaring adventure vibe, buried treasure and shipwrecks. Could you go into this is something I was fascinated by. Could you go into the sensation, like of finding gold coins from ancient Rome or discovering the sunken remnants of like a 19th century British cargo vessel? I mean, it's not something you're actively looking for, but once you find it, I mean, what are the thoughts going through your head?
I could say in one succinct word, mind blowing. Okay.
Mm,
Es- Especially the gold treasure, because that was totally unexpected. I mean, I was not even with scuba. I was just skin diving. I was 21 years old. I was on a very meager scholarship to get me through the school year. My parents scraped together a few $100s to put in my pocket, and I was off. And I was with a group of friends and my future wife, Sharon, and we were doing a campfire on the beach in a place called Caesarea. And it was the capital of the Roman Empire at the time of the great Roman Empire, if in the Middle East, in that part of the Eastern Mediterranean. And it was a significant settlement. There was 50,000 people living there at the time during the Roman period. Anyway, I went out being a kid from California. I borrowed from some friends a mask and a snorkel and flippers, and went out to snorkel with my young cousin who was with me. And he got tired, went back inshore, and I stayed out. And as I was coming back, quite tired myself, um, I looked at the seafloor. It was 30 feet or so of water. And I saw something that was kind of reflecting light, like glittering, you know. And I said, that's strange. I wonder what that could be. And with my last strength, literally, I dived down and on the sand, I with my hand, I scooped up what I thought was the source of this glitter and it's a handful of sand. And as I'm coming up, and my hand is in the palm of my hand, and the sand is sifting through my fingers, and I get to the surface. Now I'm studying archaeology. And I get to the surface, and there's this gold thing. Just say something like this,
Oh
okay?
my
This is
gosh, it's a lot
no,
bigger than I
that's not
thought.
it.
Okay.
That's a copy, okay? That somebody made for me. But just imagine this is in my hand, and I'm looking at it, and I see Imperial, IMPCAES, Caesar, Trianos. Trianos was Trajan, who ruled from 97 to 118 AD. Okay, the height of the Roman Empire. And I'm looking at it, and it looks like a coin that was minted the day before. It was
Hmm.
gold, and it was in perfect condition. And that's one of the qualities of gold. 2,000 years in the sea.
Hmm.
So I'm blown away by this, because I realize that it's something, that's not your average, quarter or something like that. This is a gold coin, a Roman. And that triggered a bunch of things that changed my life, literally. And once it was by the museum, it was authenticated. And I spent a good year milking that place, okay, to be subtle. And it got enough to give me a start in life. Okay.
Hmm.
So and then I got deep into it. I started researching it, reading books about it, and trying to understand more about that period and the Caesarea as a location and what was going on in the Holy Land during that period. And that was the period of the exile because the Jewish people were sent away from that part of the world by the Romans. They were
Hmm.
sent into 2,000 years of exile. And I don't want to get into the current history, but it was significant. I even found a gold coin which commemorated the capture of Jerusalem by
Hmm.
the Romans, which brought tears to collectors' eyes. Okay. And I sold it for much too less, much too little, because I didn't know. Um, but I had enough money then to start my diving center. So that was Then there's another kind of cute story had to do with Lawrence of Arabia.
Hmm.
Okay. Because I become now an entrepreneur, right? I have a diving center. I got to make a living. I got a burgeoning family, young little kids, and we're in the end of the world, which has tremendous inconsistencies and instabilities. So we would be building the company up, and all of a sudden, an act of war, terrorism, or something, and then for a year you wouldn't have work.
Hmm.
And so there was a movie that became very popular in that time in the mid '70s called The Deep.
Hmm.
It was quite a movie. If you people remember, Jacqueline Bisset was in a
Oh yeah.
T-shirt, a wet T-shirt,
Oh yeah. People remember
yeah,
that.
Nick Nolte, and that movie was about a shipwreck in the Caribbean, and it did wonders for scuba diving. It gave a boom. to scuba diving, and people wanted to go dive on the ship that was in the movie, and it was in the Virgin Islands, and a bunch of us are sitting around at the end of the Sinai Desert and isolated and wondering how the hell are we going to get tourists here? This is after the 73 war. And one of my colleagues said, well, let's make up a story about a shipwreck. I said, but we don't have a ship. He says, doesn't matter. We'll make up a story and you'll find the ship. And I said, okay. So we sat around and I literally fabricated a story about Lawrence of Arabia and a treasure ship. And then we would subtly hint that we found something, but we can't take people there because it's a security zone. And actually there were stories written about this non-existing shipwreck, which drew people to the area. Okay, I could talk about it now, right? And then after a couple of years, by chance, we're given a hint by one of the local Bedouin fishermen that he thinks that there might be a wreck in this far off spot. And I said, how do you get there? And he says, well, you go around the corner of the southern tip. It's called Ras Muhammad. And then you go towards the direction of the setting sun and you smoke 2 cigarettes. That's the GPS of a Bedouin, right?
Yeah.
Smoke 2 cigarettes. And then you'll see in the middle of the sea a coral reef. And at that point, we think there's a wreck because there's a lot of fish there and we see this dark shadow. So I said, what the hell? What do I got to lose? And we discovered a shipwreck, a British ship that sank in 1876, which we found much later. BBC did a big movie about it. But it fit our story. We had the story in place. We finally had the shipwreck. And we peddled that like and the shipwreck is a time capsule. It brings you back to that time and place where it sank. This one case, 1876. We found the galley, the wine bottles, the cutlery, the plates. We didn't find the treasure, okay? We found the toilet and the kitchen sink, but we didn't find the treasure. But the treasure is the story. The treasure is the experience. The treasure is the people. And that's from my title, Treasure, Shipwrecks, and the Dawn of Red Sea Diving, a pioneer's journey, has to do with the treasures of the area, the people, the experiences, and by chance, a gold treasure that happened that got it started.
Okay. That kind of leads into a great question that I had, especially as the events of the book work towards the handing back of the Sinai, that a lot of your experiences during this time involve being part of very significant and important historical events for the region. Could you go into how that impacted you, both as a person, but also as a diver? Because a lot of the book deals with the impact that these events had on your diving business. But I'm very curious to know, like, you're talking about like going to Egypt and going to these conferences and meeting the Prime Minister, Menachem Begin and Moshe Dayan. And I can only imagine, like, what is your reaction? What is your response to being in the middle of all of this?
It was overwhelming to a degree. I think in retrospect, as I look back at it, it was very significant. I wasn't sure how significant it was at the time, but in retrospect. So one of the things I did not annually, but every time a new American ambassador was assigned to Israel, I traditionally gave them a scuba diving course because they found Israel is a very intense country, and to be a diplomat in Israel is super intense. And for some reason, one of the earlier ambassadors when I was there took my diving course and then passed it on to the next one who passed it on the next one, saying, listen, you got to get away from everything for a while. And the best way to do it is go scuba diving underwater. They can't reach you. And you're in the Sinai. And you know what? You can be yourself, let your hair down. So there was an American ambassador, but much beloved and dear friend, Samuel Lewis, who was the ambassador during the peace treaty. And he would come down on every occasion that he could get away and go scuba diving. And then he was just like Sam. He wasn't Ambassador Louis. He was Sam, one of the guys, and he loved it. And there's a chapter in the book about him. And but he had a passion for scuba diving and also for an understanding of what that peace treaty, which he was very much involved in. He was in Camp David. He was part of the peacemakers, the team that made that Camp David peace treaty, the treaty between Israel and Egypt. So he was deep in, and he suggested that I um, play some kind of role in relating about the potential of the Sinai and what it means, and this whole turning this battleground into a playground. And I was chosen to go to Egypt to be part of the first what they call bilateral commission of tourism between the two countries. Because at that time they were talking peace, and Sadat had come to Sharm el-Sheikh. He had been actually, I mean, I supplied the table and chairs for them to sit in when they had the summit with Begin next to my diving center. And anyway, I presented a slideshow to the joint delegation, and I thought and my opening was to none of them were divers, not the Israelis and not the Egyptians for sure. And I said, I have to think of a catchy phrase to catch their attention. Otherwise, who knows? So my opening line was I had a shark, a big shark on the screen, and I say people will pay a lot of money to dive with sharks. And it was a gasp, what is this guy talking about? And then I went into this whole thing about the Sinai, the ecology, the beauty, the nature, the reef, the groups, the people coming, and how this could become a very good business for whoever was going to be taking over the area.
Hmm.
But you have to protect it. It has to be a nature reserve. You can't allow this. You can't allow that. And I gave almost like a lecture, but at the same time, something entertaining. And the next day, you know what? They came over to me after my lecture, after my presentation. It was at the Mean House, where's the hotel next to the pyramids where they had all of these conferences. And they said, the Egyptians came over to me and pulled me aside, and they say, "We'd like you to come tomorrow to the Ministry of Tourism." And I said, "Okay." And now, mind you, this is 6 months, 3 months after Sadat was assassinated
Hmm.
because of the peace treaty. I mean, things were like going crazy. So I went there, and they said, "We want you to stay in the Sinai." Now, I have dual citizenship. I have an American and Israeli, and they were very comfortable with that fact that I was an American
Mm.
as well, because the Americans were like the stars at that time putting this all together. Um, so they gave me a contract. They had a contract ready for me to sign to stay on in my diving center in Sharm. I was the only one. Anyway, I said I took it. I said I'll read it, I'll study it, and I'll let you know. And after discussing it with my wife, we decided we'd not leave the States to come live in Egypt. Nothing personal, but we felt strongly about raising our kids and our family in Israel.
Mm.
And so I turned it down, but I got permission from them to stay in the picture and to operate a floating hotel after the Egyptians took over. So basically, I continued for another 15 years in that area. And it was a beautiful time. It was a time where, apropos to what's going on now. I mean,
Mm.
people, peace was in the air, cooperation. I was going back and forth to Cairo. The flights were, I used to have to fly via Athens or Rome to get to Cairo from Tel Aviv, which is a 55-minute flight. Now the planes were flying directly Tel Aviv, Cairo. And it was a very promising time. And I was meeting a lot of very um, interesting and great people who were also on part of this journey of making normalization a possibility. Now, the truth of the matter is that it's been 44 years. There's peace. It's a
Mm.
cold peace. It's not the type of peace that we dreamed of, but it's peace. And it's withstood wars like what's going on now. Um, And I was a supporter, even though I lost my business. I mean, how did it affect me? I lost my business. I lost my home. I lost everything. I basically had to give up everything
Hmm.
and start anew at the age of 33, I think it was. But I supported the process because we got to find a way to live with our neighbors, you know. I mean, that's, or else it's just, you know, we're doomed. Anyway, so that, so there was a big impact on my career. I was able to pull the pieces together, buy a nice big boat, a big yacht, and turn it into a floating diving center and go all over the Red Sea and then all the way down to the Seychelles Islands and that area in the Indian Ocean. So that's the sequel. So stay tuned.
Okay, well, I actually want to ask, but the what I like to ask the guests after we talk about their book is about the experience of writing the book, and you kind of delved into that a little bit earlier. But what advice would you have for someone who wants to write their story? You know, that you had all these experiences, but you also had the, I don't know, call it the foresight to, jot down a sentence about events. But what would you say to someone who was interested in putting their experiences down into book form as well?
Okay. Um, First of all, I think it's helpful to have a story. I mean, you know, I mean, if you're talking about publishing something, I think you need content, you need a story, and then obviously the process of telling that story. Um, you have to have a lot of patience and resources, I think, to do it, and time wise. I think for me, and I'm not the type of person that can tell everybody what works, but for me, it was very helpful to find people who really understood about this stuff. I mean, I had these great stories, and some of them had been in magazines published for many years.
Hmm.
But usually there was an editor who came and dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and um, I think I was fortunate, and I this was what I would recommend to somebody else is to who is not a professional writer, who has a great story but wants to tell it, but so is to work with people because it's one thing to see things as you see it, but sometimes it can be very personal and maybe too personal. And you need somebody to come in and say, wait a minute, this, I know that meant a lot to you that day you caught a big fish, but it doesn't mean anything to the guy next door. And and I was lucky to find that and have a coach. And I was lucky enough to know people who cared enough about my story to help me and read a chapter and to come back with markings and commentary. And that was a big deal. On a memoir basis, I think one of the nice things that works with this book is that I was able to enhance it with graphics, with imagery, with I think relevant photographs and some maps and aerial stuff and stuff like that. So it just gave it to a better experience. Now, I did want to mention one thing if I can, Paul. Um, this is a story that is about challenges. It's not just about scuba diving. It's about going up against something and just nodding your head against the wall and just overcoming one obstacle after another. Um, I mean, to a relatively good um, conclusion. Um, but and it's not only an Israel story or a diving story; it has a universal appeal. But there is a Israeli aspect to it because it walks you through that period of time in Israel, in the Middle East, in Egypt, and all that. So I thought it would be helpful to do it in Hebrew also.
Hmm.
So I had the book translated. Now my Hebrew is not literary Hebrew; it's mostly swear words, But
The
I,
important stuff, yes.
yeah, the important, yeah. Um, so I found somebody who speaks very good English, but an Israeli who speaks very good English, who luckily lives in the little village where I live. And she helped me translate it. And we bounced back and forth for a few months, chapter by chapter, correction by correction. And then, so I did a translation of the book. which, if you excuse me for 2 seconds, 1 second, I'll be right back.
Okay. And again, Howard's book is Treasure, Shipwrecks, and the Dawn of Red Sea Diving, and he's going to get, I guess, the Hebrew version of it.
Okay, so
Ah,
this
there
is
it
the
is.
Hebrew. Yeah, and it's exactly the English, but in Hebrew, with a good Hebrew. And then I took an editor who worked through it, and then I took a graphic artist, and all of the imagery I got from the publisher in England. He was very kind to provide all of the files. So we put together the book in Hebrew as well, and it's done wonderfully well in Israel to the Israeli market as well. So it's in two languages and three versions: hardback, softback in English, and softback in Hebrew.
Okay, that is fantastic stuff. Howard, thank you so much for being here today. This is a great story, and I'm not a scuba diver. I live near the ocean, but I hardly even go into it at all. But it's a fascinating story, and it's also it really is a piece of history that, and you're at the heart of it all, and all these great stories. Where can people find out more about you? And I also know there's I before we started, you have a website for the book, but there's also a website for your diving company.
Yeah. Okay. So just before I go there, the rights for this book have been sold to make a movie. It's
Okay.
going to be a documentary movie about the book, which is in the pipeline as well. An American company out of Los Angeles bought the rights and they want to make a documentary about it. So we made our own website for ordering online. Um, and I can provide you can put it in the notes if you want about, and I'll be happy to give a sign. Anybody who wants it, be happy to send a signed copy. Um, so we have a website. Amazon sells the book as well, and it's got a whole page there with a lot of very nice reviews, reader reviews in Amazon. Also, Goodreads. Yeah. Um, so I mean, the book is available, and anybody who is interested could follow up with the website and order it online or through Amazon. Um, and wait for the movie, I guess, as well, and the sequel. Thank you for kindly giving me an opportunity to share my story, and hopefully enough people might be interested to read the book as
Of
well.
course, of course. Well, before we sign off, so what is the you said there's a website for the book, and that was I believe you said it's Yamolam, so YAMOLAM.com. And your company is Fantasy, Fantasea, Fantasy as an ocean.com. So if I guess for people who's like, hey, I want to go to the Mediterranean, I want to go to Israel and go diving, and I got to get in touch with Howard.
Yeah, please come. Welcome, welcome. I have also a dedicated email, books, BOOKS, at fantasy, FANTASEA.com. So it's not hard to get a hold of me. And I'd love to hear from people, very much so. Yes.
Okay, I will take care of that. And also, where can people find out more about you? I know you're on social media. Where can people, what platforms can people find you on?
Okay. So first of all, I'm social media and Facebook, um, Howard Rosenstein, or I think H-Man or HMAN 1947. I'm in Instagram. Um, what else? Facebook, Instagram. I have my own YouTube channel. And if you just do Google search Howard Rosenstein, you can find out all this information. There's a few other Howard Rosensteins, but I can't vouch for their character. I don't know anything about them. But Howard Rosenstein, diver or photographer, will get you onto my page with all of the different reviews and stories and videos and all that stuff. And I'd love to hear from anybody who finds the story interesting.
Okay, well, that is fantastic stuff. Howard, again, the book Treasure, Shipwrecks, and the Dawn of Red Sea Diving, A Pioneer's Journey. Howard, thank you once again for being here today.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it, and good luck to you with your fine platform.
Well, thank you so much. And viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like. Feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. For our audio version, our theme music is by Mark Gunyon. For my social media, you can check out my screenwriting blog at maximumz.blog. This show is on Blue Sky at Podcast CWL. I'm still setting up the Instagram page. And also for me, I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram at Pez Screenwriting. And you can check out my Go Ahead and Ask books. Those are on Amazon about screenwriting and pie. Like I said, that's Howard. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.